Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is part 3 of a 4-part series featuring Probíta, that's Visi's new enzyme hydrolyzed collagen. My name is Teresa Carter, and I'll be your host as we delve even deeper tonight into the extraordinary benefits of this exquisite product. I'm going to begin with a reminder that Probíta is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure diseases, but it is specially formulated to help support your body even through serious challenges, as you're about to discover tonight. So we are talking about sleep, more specifically about problems associated with a lack of sleep, and about stress. It's notoriously referred to as the silent killer. If by chance you think that these challenges don't really affect you personally, even if you recognize that they're not ideal, but hey, that's the way things are living in our world today, right? Well, you might be taken aback at some of the information we're about to share. Some of it's pretty scary. I mean, there's really no other better way to put it. But our main goal tonight is to enlighten you and to inspire you, actually, and to empower you to support your health and your well-being in the best way that we know how. Joining me now is our resident expert, biochemist Rena Davis. In addition to her 4 decades of experience as a biochemist, Rena is also a clinical nutritionist, currently in private practice at her Holistic Wellness Center in St. Helens, Oregon, and has been for more than 2 decades now. And she's well known in the field of health and wellness as a specialist in the clinical use of collagen. Welcome to the call, Rena.
Well, thank you, Teresa.
Well, Rena, you heard me state our goal for the evening. We're hoping to impart some lesser-known information, some very profound information. It might be somewhat of a wake-up call, no pun intended. Okay, that was a bad pun. I intended it. Very bad. Oh, see, it's good to hear you laugh. See, truth be known, I wanted to start tonight's session out on a bit of a lighter note because we are about to broach 2 very heavy subjects. Are you ready for this, Rena?
I am.
Well, not only starting out on a lighter note, I also wanted to start out on a positive note. Let's talk about sleep for a second. Why is it so vital and why is it so wonderful? What's happening when we put our head on the pillow?
Well, Teresa, there are several processes that happen when we are in our sleep state, and probably most of our listening audience is aware of it. But, even when we go to sleep and get into deep REM sleep, we dream. And dreaming is one of the ways that we de-stress from, all of our everyday challenges. It's also true that in the first couple of hours of sleep is when the highest amount of regeneration is done in the human chemistry. So, sleep is really pretty important, not only so that we can be awake and refreshed and get up and do it all again the next day, but that powerful point about de-stressing and being able to repair and regenerate, that's pretty important in everyone's life, whether you are 1 year old or 100 years old.
I did a little research here, and apparently there are more than 85 different sleep disorders recognized by the American Sleep Disorders Association. Well, the staggering statistics are that this affects more than 70 million Americans. I don't know statistically how many that would be by odds just of all of us on the line tonight, but they're pretty staggering numbers. Now, what's really important, from what I can tell, is the clinical consequences of these disorders, and most of them apparently go untreated. They go unrecognized, not good, and we're talking some serious medical illnesses. Now, we're only going to be able to touch on some of them because of the constraints of time. I'm going to attempt to group several of these together in what I think will be related categories, but please feel free to expand beyond the bounds of that or relegate them to another group. I'm going to first add for your consideration here, Rena, high blood pressure, heart attack, heart failure, and stroke.
Yeah, the studies are very clear in this regard, and stress is a key factor. When we don't rest and de-stress, well, then we know certainly that lack of sleep and not de-stressing in the dream state increases some hormones in the body that are among the very first things targeted by doctors when you have high blood pressure or hypertension. And, we're kind of a ticking bomb. We've come accustomed, I think, in modern society to people with high blood pressure and being on a high blood pressure medication, which certainly has been extremely successful. But the studies clearly show that even though medical treatment of hypertension works, it shortens your life by about 5 years. So it really is important for us to think about that and to think about it in the expanded version, which is when we have hypertension, that's sort of the early warning shot across the bow that we're putting back pressure on our blood vessels, on our arteries, and on our heart, all of which can lead to heart attacks and strokes. And certainly genetic individuality is going to play some roles here, but there's no doubt that there is a deep correlation between ample amounts of rest and good cardiovascular health.
All right, so yes, genetic individuality. Let's say somebody is genetically predisposed to be overweight, or let's say it's not even a predisposition, but they just happen to be overweight. That can contribute to it, but also there's something else at play here with obesity. Could you just touch on insulin resistance and the lack of sleep?
Yeah, insulin resistance, we now know two things in the world of hormones. Insulin, of course, is a hormone, and we know lack of sleep tends to increase or desensitize our body to its own insulin. Type 2 diabetes is really carbohydrate intolerance and insulin resistance. In other words, we're still making insulin, but our bodies can't utilize it. We've become resistive to what we produce, and that on another level is driven by increases in cortisol. I think probably some of the scariest stuff out there in R&D today is how elevation of cortisol affects our ability to sleep, our ability to cope with stress, and oh by golly, sacking on all those pounds. As that particular hormone elevates, it begins to stimulate other hormones which actually increase our appetite.
I think that shocks a lot of people. Someone can be attempting to manage their weight. They're trying to lose weight. They're following some sort of a protocol, and they're not able to take the weight off, in addition to which they are sleep deprived. They're actually exacerbating their weight issue, aren't they?
Yes, they are. In fact, it's sort of the mantra that we hear literally out there in the world today. I certainly hear it clinically all day long, every day. And it used to be for those people that were in the more over-the-hill group, 50, 55, 60 years of age. No matter what I do, I not only can't lose, but I can continue to creep up. I'm exercising. I've cut back on my carbs. I'm not doing junk food. I'm trying to do more fruits and veggies. And yet my weight continues to creep up. Well, when we're not resting well, and the cortisol levels are elevating, there's a very direct correlation between cortisol and insulin resistance. There's a very direct correlation between not sleeping adequately and insulin resistance and also cortisol levels. We call cortisol the death hormone, and we do that for a reason, because it's highest when we die. So one of the most important things for all of us to be able to do is to be able to sleep deeply, rest really well, wake alert and ready to go, because that allows our body to rebalance these hormones.
Are you talking about what happens in the body during the classic fight or flight syndrome?
That's really kind of getting under the stress mechanism, but since you bring it up, let's talk about it. Cortisol is an absolute good guy. We have all these hormones in our body that are really good guys until they get out of balance. It's back to that wonderful word homeostasis. So when we're under a lot of stress, then, stress influences sleep, sleep influences stress. So when we're under a lot of stress, especially in our daily lives, cortisol level begins to elevate. Now, cortisol's job is to take care of us when the bear is chasing us down the path. We get the adrenaline to get us moving, but it's cortisol that gives us the endurance. It keeps us moving. Now, in modern society, of course, today our stresses don't come from the bear chasing us down the path, and we don't understand that the smartest thing we could ever do is go out and ride our bicycle or run until we're exhausted, and now we've spent the cortisol. And so it continues to elevate, and then very often it drives us towards craving carbohydrate because the body wants out of stress, and that, of course, then drives up the insulin resistance and drives up the cortisol even more. And at the same time, it begins to suppress other very positive hormones, especially in the venue of wanting to lose weight. There's a wonderful character by the name of leptin. This is actually manufactured in our fat cells. And leptin gets released from the fat cells and tells the brain to tell the appetite to shut up, that we've got everything that we need, and that what we really need to do is start burning those stored calories. So you can kind of see it gets to be a vicious cycle. Stress, sleep, sleep, stress, ghrelin, leptin, all of these different compounds become so horrifically affected by stress and sleep.
Absolutely. I'm going to put here for your consideration psychiatric problems, including depression and other mood disorders, and I'm also going to add to that attention deficit disorder and other forms of mental impairment.
Yeah, mental impairment, cognitive function, mood regulation. The studies are really quite clear. I mean, we could go all the way back to World War I and World War II and examine what happened to guys that were in POW camps. One of the first ways that they would break people is they would create sleep deprivation. And we know now today that nothing can affect our cognitive ability more significantly. Now, think about that for a minute. We live in a world where we're eating 192 foods every year that are genetically modified. We have more pollution in the air. We have more volcanoes blowing their stack. We have more cars and trains and boats and planes and bombs and everything you can think of. And yet still we know today that lack of sleep can be the biggest driver in cognitive function. And you just got to bet that everybody at one time or another in their life has had the circumstance where they got the emergency call in the middle of the night. Maybe they got an hour or 2 hours of sleep. They had to jump in the car to go rescue a kid or mom and dad. And boy, I'll tell you what, by the time you drive for 4 or 5 hours to get there on 2 hours of sleep, it doesn't take very long before you realize the brain isn't playing on the same level that you've been accustomed to most of your life. Well, think about that happening even in graduated circumstances. Let's say that 3 nights a week you get decent sleep, but 4 nights a week you don't. And what can happen literally is cognitive function begins to slip away. Today we have batteries of cognitive tests where we can test this, but also in sleep clinics all across the country. A tremendous amount of information has come forward when our sleep is disturbed. Let's examine, for example, sleep apnea. What happens to people with sleep apnea? Their cognitive function goes down. They tend to start gaining a lot of weight. Their partner very often will do the same because they hear them quit breathing and they wake up. And, it's a downward spiral. This sleep thing is far more important than I think most people realize. And it's surprising to me the number of people that I've known in my lifetime, and most recently, who have said to me, you told me that this supplement you're giving me was going to improve my sleep, but I didn't really have any problem sleeping whatsoever. I thought, until finally I was sleeping so deeply that the first few days I found it hard to get up, and then after a short time I discovered that I was naturally waking up earlier. I was in a good mood, and I was ready to go, and I didn't need those 5 cups of coffee to get me out the door. So this sleep thing can be more profound than many people realize, because if you're sleeping, not waking up and having a difficulty going back to sleep, you think you don't have a sleep problem. But if you're not sleeping deeply and awaking in the morning ready to go, then the quality of the sleep is less than optimal, and that can affect your chemistry horrifically.
Now, I found that feeling tired for people can start to feel normal after a short period of time. And you're saying, some people, they had no idea that they were sleep deprived. I did find out that when people are deliberately deprived of sleep, for example, if they're in a research study, that they initially report that they notice great effects. Detrimental effects in their mood and their physical performance, but that awareness then starts to drop off after the first few days. So imagine our conditioning, how we're not even aware as you say, that we're so hindered. I also found an interesting statistic from the National Institutes of Health, and they're talking now about the day-to-day performance of people. We're not talking about diseases, we're talking about getting through the day optimally. They state that after several nights of losing sleep, even a loss of just 1 to 2 hours per night, that your ability to function suffers as if you hadn't slept at all for 2 days.
Yeah, it's really true. Reactionary times, like, for example, when you're driving the car and someone, stops abruptly in front of you, or someone, forces you to have that red alert moment. We know now that even 1 hour of sleep is enough to slow down that reactionary time so that we can't hit the brakes as fast as we would if we had been resting well. And there's also been studies done in athletic performance and how if the athletes are not sleeping well, deeply, and waking, feeling rested and refreshed, that their overall coordination in things like basketball and team sports is diminished by as much as 25%. That's somebody that's in the peak of their prime, right? They got lots of muscles, they don't got too much body fat, they're training every day, they're working out every day, and just see how losing an hour of sleep can affect the body's ability to perform.
Interesting, yeah. One more thing before we leave this, because you've brought up driving twice. Let's face it, that's a day-to-day activity for most of us. There are approximately 100,000 car crashes that are caused each year, reportedly, by drowsy drivers. And of these accidents, they usually result in more than 1,500 fatalities. What I thought was really interesting is that one of the quotes, again from the NIH, was stating that 17 hours of sustained wakefulness. Okay, let's stop for 1 second and contemplate what that is. Imagine so many of us on the line, the workathons that we do, the marathon days, the hours we put in. So 17 hours of sustained wakefulness can lead to a decrease in performance equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05. Now, I have to admit, I had to look that up. I'm not familiar with blood alcohol levels. I have no idea what that indicates. But apparently, that is, let's say, the average woman drinking one alcoholic drink. Now, we're not talking about alcohol here, but we're talking about the equivalency in the diminished capacity. That's with somebody pulling a marathon of 17 hours without sleep. That's a regular day for most people. So you can imagine the accumulative effect of somebody pulling an all-nighter. Look at college students and look at people who are working swing shifts. This really is very detrimental and very dangerous and perhaps counts for those 100,000 crashes a year. Your comments on that, Rena?
It really is true, and in the final analysis of things, when we don't sleep and all these chemistries change, our body's ability to even rebalance when we do put in good nutrition and get some sleep can take several days. And that's the thing that I think disturbs me the most about sleep deprivation, or even something less than that, is that what we don't understand and really need to understand is when we pull that all-nighter, it can take as much as 5 to 7 days of good sleep to totally restore the biochemical balance that is created by the lack of sleep, and that is significant.
Here's something also scary. I read that sleep deficiency is not only harmful on a personal level, like we've just been describing. You were talking about performance athletes. I was talking about driving the car, basically as though you're under the influence of an alcoholic substance. But it has been stated that that is the cause of these large-scale accidents, and the examples that they gave, pretty scary. A nuclear reactor meltdown, grounding of large ships, and aviation accidents. Anyone on the line is thinking that they're doing everything right. You never know which pilot's going to be piloting your plane or which driver's going to be coming at you in traffic.
Well, certainly we know, especially in the field of air traffic controllers, that this has become an increasingly difficult circumstance. And, of course, medicine will give you sleeping pills, but many times sleeping pills can allow you to sleep, but the hangover is actually worse than the sleep deprivation because it can take you several hours to come out of that fog. And the studies in that particular area have been pretty acute.
You mentioned, when you were just talking a moment ago, the thing that disturbs you the most. I just want to share the thing that shocked me the most. There's something called microsleep, and it refers to brief moments that occur when you're normally awake. The examples that were given, again, I hearken back to the good old NIH for this research. The examples that were given were, again, driving a car. Now, what they said is, if you've ever driven on a long trip and you had segments where you don't really remember part of the trip, you may have actually been asleep. I find that shocking, but it even gets better. If, for example, you're listening to a lecture and you might miss some of the information or feel like you don't understand the point, in reality, you may have slept through part of the lecture and not been aware of it. I sure hope that's not happening to our listeners here tonight, Rena. Microsleep.
Boy, isn't that the truth? We wouldn't want to be so monotonous that they're dropping into micro moments of sleep. But it is true, and thank goodness that in some ways that we have all these sleep clinics and that we've gained such remarkable information from the sleep studies that have been done by several different institutions now around the world.
All right, Rena, stress. I'm looking at the clock and I'm getting stressed just thinking that this is going to turn out longer than we had intended. But stress, you talked about cortisol. There's nothing much good that I could find about it from head to toe. I'm going to let you take the lead on this, but my goodness, I've got this litany of horrible, horrible things, including that it is, as mentioned at the top of the call, the #1 killer. It's the silent killer, and there's really not much good that can be said about it, is there?
No, there really isn't. I like to get my clients to think about stress in a new way. We all kind of know what it is. We've all kind of been through it, but we don't all understand the biochemistry of it. And I know we're a little crunched for time, but I think that this is really important. You know, when we get stressed in the short term, adrenaline amps up to give us the get up and go that we need to handle the situation at that moment. Any of us who've been through an emergency with a pet or a child or a mate understands, you know, there's this part of you that kicks into gear and you're suddenly Superman or Superwoman getting everything done that needs to be, and then when they're finally in the care of whoever can really remedy the situation, all of a sudden you can hardly stand up, your legs turn to jelly. Well, in that process, what happens is when that adrenaline releases, initially, it disturbs your pH. And the pH regulation of the body is perhaps one of the most important things about stress being the number one killer. And again, when it's momentary, we recover after a couple of days. But when it's ongoing, gnawing, unrelenting stress, then one of the biggest biochemical facts is that it chronically keeps your pH out of balance. This is extremely significant. Every transaction that happens, cell to cell, cell to organ, blood to cell, all of that stuff happens because of this electrolytic process that requires very rigorous pH control. And when we're under chronic stress and we go over acid, the body begins to gather up whatever it needs to correct that chronic pH. You know, a good example of this is the diabetic. You know, so many doctors will say to their diabetic clients, you know, you can pretty much live a normal life, but if you have the occasional piece of cake on your birthday, just take more medication, and they teach them how to do that. What they're not telling them, and this refers to pH, is that when your blood sugar is running above normal, even a small amount above normal, the blood becomes hot, it becomes acid. It doesn't take much of a change, far less than a point, on the pH scale before your red blood cells begin to die and release hemoglobin into the serum, which is never a good thing, as well as reducing the body's ability to get adequate amounts of oxygen at the cellular level. We are an oxygen machine. So what happens then when you have chronic stress is over time your pH is chronically out of balance, and your body begins to rob from your diet, from your dietary supplements, and from your own organs and bones the necessary antioxidants and minerals to correct that pH. And what happens is that when it goes on and on and on and on, we begin to have various nutritional deficiencies, which sets us up for all kinds of bad things. Now, we add to that as that stress becomes chronic, that cortisol level continues to climb. And we know that there are at least 10 serious conditions that exist in the human body that are now identified as being driven, if not caused, by elevated cortisol levels, including something as simple as belly fat, blood sugar regulation, and cognitive function. All of these are laid at the foot of high cortisol levels. So stress is the number one driver of cortisol. It is the number one driver of cortisol. As it elevates, it suppresses something called DHEA, a mother hormone that floats around in the blood and can adapt to fill in the gaps for other missing hormones. Now, in the world of weight loss, this becomes extremely significant. As cortisol levels begin to climb chronically, we begin to see that abdominal fat, belly fat, begins to build up. Now, there's the warning shot across the bow on hypertension, on possible heart attacks, and possible strokes, because we know that when we accumulate fat in those areas, it's greatly affecting the cardiovascular system. We also know that as long as we're not sleeping well, coping with stress well, and that cortisol level stays high, you can literally starve and not get that belly fat off. So the two go hand in hand. So this whole stress thing on the biochemical level becomes extremely significant to all of us wanting to have full, long, healthy, and vital lives.
You know, Rena, you mentioned that people are at an advanced state of sleep deprivation without even knowing it. I've read that most people become so numb to their stress, they just keep going. And even the AMA, I mean, you know how mainstream they are, they state that stress is the cause of more than 60% of all human illnesses and diseases. So you can imagine what the more naturopathic world would have to say about that. Pretty much 100% mind-body connection, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and I think that that's what we're really talking about here with, in particular, Probíta and the Visi products, that learning to provide the fuel to your body to handle the stress. I tell my clients, think about having a 1-ton pickup truck that's fully loaded. In other words, that baby is loaded to the full 1-ton capacity. And all of a sudden you come to a hill that's a 20 or 30% incline. What's going to happen? you're going to pop it out a fifth into fourth, and you're going to pour on the gas. You're going to pop it out a fourth into third. You're going to pour on the gas even more. And by the time you get to the top of the hill, you're probably in second, and your miles per gallon is really low. Well, you know what, TC? It's that way for us as well. When we're under chronic stress, the truth is we can't eat enough in a day to provide these fuels the body needs to rebalance pH, to fight cortisol elevation, to manage how our body responds to stress. The truth is we can't change stress in the world. Man, it's here to stay. As near as I can figure, it's only going to change flavors every now and again to keep things interesting. What we can do is we can provide the right kind of fuels so the stress doesn't beat the dickens out of the human body. And that has become one of the most important things in healing arts across the board of our time.
The one thing that's coming to mind is how many times you've talked about enzyme hydrolyzed collagen and its benefits on the sleep cycle, sleep process. Can you address that?
And it really does. We are providing these vital peptides and vital proteins, and it's proteins that make up things like serotonin. Serotonin is actually manufactured in the brain on the other side of the blood-brain barrier, and serotonin has some pretty significant jobs. It's the most studied of all the neurotransmitters, and that's because it has the broadest influence. Serotonin converts to melatonin. So serotonin regulates our ability to cope with stress. It reduces our cravings for carbohydrates and sugar. It increases our body's ability to cope with pain. And most importantly, it allows us to get into deep REM sleep. And for that reason, the company wisely has recommended that you take your Probíta first thing in the morning and take your second serving again at bedtime. Now, if I don't keep my hands out of the cookie jar, I can eat a lot of those in a day because it helps me cope with my stress. It helps me sleep better. It makes my muscles stronger, my flexibility better, all kinds of things. But one of the most important things that I believe Probíta does is it provides these foundational nutrients, we call these precursors. Enough of this extra fuel goes into the body that it allows the body to make serotonin and help us regulate our stress and sleep better. That then helps us down-regulate cortisol, up-regulate DHEA, down-regulate ghrelin, and up-regulate leptin. And that's the whole idea.
So interesting, because we have talked so much on these calls about better skin, better hair, better nails, and who doesn't want that? And we've talked about better athletic performance and the tightening of the muscles, and who doesn't want that as well? But we've been talking about life and death situations here tonight, and it's so interesting to see how something so simple yet so biochemically exquisite, and I'm going to add that again, yummy, as Probíta, that it can have this profound effect on our overall health and well-being.
It really does, and I think sometimes people need to remember that this collagen chew has a lot of power, and its ability to help the body regenerate itself is pretty profound. I teach my clients, by the way, to throw away the scale, get out the tape measure, because as all these corrections are made in the human body, weight is sort of an issue that shouldn't be even addressed. What should be addressed is size, because your body will begin to burn fat and replace organ weight density and size and lean muscle mass.
Wonderful information. You know, it feels like we've barely scratched the surface, and in truth, we have gone a little bit more quickly than we normally do. There's just so much to talk about. But we do need to draw this call to a close here. I'm sure maybe we'll be able to do a sequel on this topic, because there's still a lot we could have uncovered and some parallels we could have drawn. But I am glad that you were able to bring in the comforting news about Probíta and how it can help people through these challenging times. So any final thoughts, Rena?
Well, the final thought is if you're having a worse than average bad hair day, don't hesitate to take an extra Probíta, because it really helps.
All right. Well, I wasn't expecting you to state it that way, but I like that. We'll take that. Oh, thanks for those insights, Rena. And thank you so much for all you do here every week to help us really grasp this profound opportunity that we all have here with Probíta.
Well, thanks you, TC, and thanks to our listening audience for sharing this time with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to all of you, our listeners, we hope that the goal of our call here was indeed met tonight, that you're empowered with some greater understanding of how incredibly important adequate sleep is and how incredibly important it is to help minimize stress in your day-to-day life. And in addition, how your body can utilize enzyme hydrolyzed collagen to help support you with that goal. Now, if you're already taking Probíta, We trust you'll find that comforting. I know I did. And if you're brand new and you're hearing about this for the first time, please get back with the person who invited you. That way you can try your first box of Probíta Collagen Chews soon. So until we all meet again, I'm going to wish everyone deep and restful sleep tonight and a wonderful experience enjoying Probíta and its many, many, many benefits. Good night, everyone. Thanks again, Rena Davis.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Everyone, take care. We'll see you next time.